What's going on, guys? Aaron from Top Tier Gaming here, and today I'm actually bringing you the very first Exosister deck profile on the channel. Exosister is a brand new archetype out of the Grand Creators, and it's a very cool archetype with a very nifty strategy, which involves your opponent moving cards out of the graveyard and gaining sort of Zodiac-like effects based on your monsters. And it sort of creates a very cool gameplay standpoint where if your opponent touches their graveyard, you get huge benefits. And it's a pretty passive deck in that regard, but we have sort of adjusted the list for this type of playstyle, and it's a very interesting deck, and I sort of love the lore aspects of the deck. I think it's very cool. The archetype reminds me a lot of the anime D. Gray Man, which if you've seen that, you can probably see the similarities in the fact that, you know, they're exorcists, and there's actually quite a few other similarities, but it's a very cool deck. I love the lore behind it, I love the art, and the playstyle is also very different from most, and it leads to some interesting gameplay. That being said, if you are a fan of Exosisters, please leave a like on this video, subscribe for future Exosister content. It definitely helps us in what we do here on the channel. And also, Discord link down below if you want to hang out in a Yu-Gi-Oh community, maybe play Master Duel with friends, or just talk about the game in general. Discord down below if that sounds interesting to you. It's a great time. And without further ado, let's get into the Exosister deck profile. So starting off, we're going to have the 3 Ellis. So instead of laying out the entire Exosister engine like I normally would, I'm going to go through each one because these are pretty new cards, but we'll go through them relatively quickly. So we have Ellis. Each Exosister main deck monster has the effect that if your opponent moves a card in either graveyard, they get the effect to Exceed summon into an Exosister Exceed monster from your extra deck using the Exosister monster as a material. That's sort of the basis for this archetype and how the deck functions. Kind of like Zodiacs in the sense that they're one card Exceeds, but they require your opponent to interact with their graveyard. And because it says move, it's pretty easy actually to like resolve these. Yeah, Ellis is one of the better ones. If you control an Exosister monster, you can special summon her from your hand. Now, the Exosisters are on the buddy system, which means they have a partner, and Ellis's partner is actually Stella. So Stella's effect is actually that you can special summon an Exosister from your hand. So these are sort of the extenders for the Exosister archetype, and like I said, they are on the buddy system, and what that means is if you activate their effects while you control the other one, you get to gain 800 life points, which is super cool because there's a lot of cards in the deck that actually make you pay 800 life points. So it sort of complements that in the sense that you're mitigating the damage you're taking from your spell and trap effects, so that's very nice. But yeah, these are the ones you definitely want to max out at 3 because they are the extenders and help you make rank 4s on your turn. Next up, we have 3 Sophia. So this one we want to max out on. She's not an extender like the others. However, she does have just like the best effect on field. If you control another Exosister monster, you can activate her effect and you simply draw a card. It's just a free draw, which can really help your first turn be a lot better because the first turn is normally like 1 rank 4. Or like, you can definitely be more explosive if your hand is just filled with Exosister cards, but it's like a 2 or 3 card combo to see 2 rank 4s turn 1. But yeah, being able to just like special summon this off Stella and get a draw and then rank 4 and then search is a lot of advantage in just a couple cards. So her draw is very, very nice. And then her partner is the double Irene. And Irene, unfortunately, is probably the worst of the bunch in terms of her other effect. She can put 1 Exosister card in your hand to the bottom of the deck to draw a card. And again, they are on the buddy system, so when they activate their effects while the other one's on the field, you gain 800 life points, which is nice. The reason we're on 2 Irene, even though her effect is not that great, I mean, compared to Sophia, who just freely draws, this you have to put an Exosister card that you probably want on the bottom of the deck to get an additional random lotto draw. But the reason we play 2, even though she's not that fantastic, is there's a lot of cards that require the other name to exist to function, like one of your trap cards, for example. If you're going to special Sophia, you also have to special Irene, so that is why we are on 2 of her. Otherwise, I would probably just play 1, but also just seeing Exosister names is pretty good to make sure you're able to get your rank 4 on the field turn 1. We want to increase the chance that we see Exosister cards. Alright, next up, I'm playing this deck quite different from other lists I've seen. I think a lot of people are on cards like Gigabyte and the Nefarious Archfiend of Nefariousness. And those cards are like really cool for making rank 4s, but they're a little gimmicky in my eyes. Like, they're not great cards, and they actually open you up more to Nibiru than I would like this deck to. So I'm playing this deck quite different than I've seen, but I think this version is much, much better. And I think you'll see this card and kind of know how we're playing it. We're on 3 Lord of the Heavenly Prison, which means we are using this guy to his maximum potential. You have a lot of very good Exosister spells and traps that I'll get to later in the deck profile that you want to be setting off of this card to use them on your opponent's turn. This also protects your back row. He's a giant 3k body. This card is insane. And because we are playing level 4s, it means we can actually make Gallant Granite to search this card. This card has been overperforming in all of my test games. I've been playing this deck for a little under a week now. I took it to a tournament as well, where we performed pretty well. We 2-0'd Striker, Dragons, and we ended up losing to some skill drain stuff, which is always fun. But the deck performed well, and part of it is due to Lord of the Heavenly Prison being such an amazing card, protecting your back row and getting you like more back row. Like when I get to the traps, you'll like see why this card's so good. But this card is absolutely phenomenal. So we are maxing out on 3 of it. We don't particularly want to draw multiples, but it's not like always terrible either. You have a lot of spells and traps you can just activate to proc his effect. And then next up, the only hand trap we're actually playing in the deck is 3 Ash Blossom. A lot of my initial builds, this is like version 4 I think, a lot of my initial builds weren't playing Ash at all. And that's because, you know, it's not a high impact card. Like Ash is usually just like a good trade. It's not super high impact. I wanted to play very impactful trap cards to interact with my opponent and things that get me multiple pluses. But, you know, some more testing. Yeah, even though Ash isn't like the most impactful card, when you're just letting your opponent freely activate cards like Pot of Extravagance or Sanguine, it feels really bad. So like, even though she's not super high impact, we don't want to let our opponent freely Fusion Destiny or Pot of Extravagance, right? Like, there were so many times I wanted Ash, so she definitely had to come back into the deck list, even though it sort of goes against the impactful traps we want to play. But Ash is just like so good this format as well at stopping perhaps the Brave stuff, or you know, Eldritch is everywhere, and Sanguine can get hit by Ash, Extravagance can get hit by Ash, so I think Ash is just really good. Alright, next up on to sort of the Exosister spells. We are on 3 packs. This is just the best Exosister spell by far. This card's actually really, really good. So, all the Exosister spells and traps pay 800 life points to activate. That's not entirely true. There is a continuous spell, but since it's continuous, you don't have to pay 800 to activate its effects every time. But the other spells and traps, you have to pay 800 to activate. Packs during the main phase, you can pay 800 to add an Exosister card from your deck to your hand. The fact that it says card is very, very good because there's times you already have all the monsters you want and you can actually search a trap instead, which is quite nice. Or just anything you need in that moment. And it's also a quick play, which means you can do some really nifty stuff on your opponent's turn with its next effect, where if you add a monster with packs, if you control or have in your graveyard her like partner, so say like Ellis is in graveyard and you search Stella, you can actually special summon it, which makes it either a Rhoda or an emergency teleport, which is very, very good. This card is quite insane. It's definitely like the best card in the deck, bar maybe the trap card, so we are maximizing 3 of it. And then we have 2 Armament, and I was on 3 of this for most of the builds I've played with this deck, but I did have some dead draws with it. It does require, you know, having Exosisters to be good. We have so many ways to search this card. I feel like 2 is just fine, but this is an easy way to play when your opponent's not falling into the Exosister trap of touching their graveyard. This allows you to pay 800 to Exceed Summon over an Exosister monster by activating this card. Now, the sort of downside with this card is it can only be activated on your opponent's turn, unless your opponent controls a monster special summon from the graveyard, and then you can use it on either turn, and then it's like really good because you can use it to like dodge imperms and just instantly get a beater on your side of the field that will do something. Yeah, it's very, very good, but most of the time you're using this on your opponent's turn as a way to get an Xyz on the field, even if they're not touching their graveyard, so it kind of lets the deck play around its own gimmick. 1 Exosister Carpe Diem. This card is actually insane. Like, it has so many good effects, but it doesn't actually do anything on its own, so we're only playing 1 of it as a searchable card. It's really interesting. So it has a continuous effect where your Exosister monsters can't be targeted by a monster special summon from the graveyard. This is like okay. It might be good in like a different format. In this format, it doesn't actually do anything because DPE doesn't target, and that's like the #1 threat that's coming out of the graveyard. So that effect is almost irrelevant in this format, but it might come up in the future. One of its more nifty effects is when you Exceed summon an Exosister monster, you can declare a card name, and that card's effects are negated for the rest of the turn. So it's a prohibition for a turn. This has saved me a lot. Like, my opponent has just called Battle Phase, and I've used Armament to Exceed summon an Exosister monster, and then I called Evenly Match, right? Like, it can save you from cards like that. Or if you know what deck your opponent's on, you can call a very important piece for them, like by using Armament. Like, say against Dinosaur, you can just Armament and then call Overraptor. It has some really cool interactions as a prohibition that can sort of change what it's calling every turn. But then, like, the really good effect, and the reason I'm running it, is when there's an attack declared involving an Exosister monster, which means it could be your Exosister monster attacking, or your opponent attacking an Exosister monster, you can target one spell or trap card your opponent controls and destroy it. This is super good versus back row decks and can get really out of hand really quickly and just pick away at your opponent's floodgates. This means if you have this, skill drain becomes a lot less of a problem. It's still like a big problem for this deck, but it's definitely less of a problem with this card. You can pick apart There Can Be Only One, any floodgate that's a problem, or, you know, just traps in general. Like, you can pop a torrential with this, right? So this card can just pick apart back row decks, and that's why we're choosing to play it. It's also just another search if you happen to, like, open all of your really good Exosister cards. Lastly, for spells, we are on 1 Called by the Grave and 1 Harpy's Feather Duster. The Harpy's Feather Duster is just like a really good blowout that we can set with Lord of the Heavenly Prison. Because there's so many Eldritch decks going around right now, and Harpy's Feather Duster is very good versus them, being able to just like activate a trap and then set Harpy's Feather Duster from our deck is very, very powerful and can just net you wins versus like Sky Striker and Eldritch very, very easily. So yeah, I wanted to play this one blowout spell we can set off of the Lord, but because our deck has so many good in-engine spells we can set, like, that's what I was saying about Lord, we could set Pax, which is a Rhoda or an emergency teleport, and that's just like one thing Lord can set in engine, which is really good, which is why I wanted to play him. But the next card in the deck is the true reason we are playing Lord of the Heavenly Prison. So for the trap cards, we are on 3 of the Exosister trap, Exosister Vadis. Now this card is amazing and is sort of the way you are going to win a lot of your games. Be it because your Exosisters are proccing, or you just need like a rank 4 easy access. So this card, you can pay 800 life points to special 2 Exosister monsters from your deck that are partners, which means you can either special Elise and Stella, or Irene and Sophia. And this is really good because it's a trap card, which means you can chain it to things and then sort of trick your opponent, right? Like, if you don't have an Exosister monster in your field and your opponent activates Monster Reborn, you can chain Vadis, special summoning 2 Exosister monsters. Monster Reborn will resolve, and then on a new chain, you'll get both of your Exosister effects, which is super good to get a lot of Exosister Exceeds monsters on the field very easily. Now, you can also just activate it on your turn to get 2 monsters on the board to make a rank 4, which is very nice. Yeah, this card is crazy because it can essentially very easily be 2 Exosister Exceeds monsters from your extra deck. And it's a trap card, which means you can activate this and like proc your Lord, or Lord can set this for your next turn. It is like a double Sanguine and is a super good card, and is one of the reasons I chose a more heavy trap variant, is to play Lord of the Heavenly Prison, which is pretty much a starter if you can get Vadis, right? It's very, very good. And yeah, this card is phenomenal. We're definitely on 3 of it. And yeah, this card is fantastic. 3 Solemn Strike. Yeah, Strike is just one of the best traps in the game, right? But a really good thing about Strike in this deck is Vadis is such an important trap card that it is afraid of Ash Blossom. So Strike is another way to sort of deter Ash on our Vadis. To pair along with our 2 Solemn Strike, we actually have 2 Witch's Strike. So some traps in this deck are a little interesting, and I'd say this is one of them. I think Witch's Strike is actually just a really good card this format because there's so many cards that negate. You have like Mechaba, Solemn Strike and Solemn Judgment and Eldritch. You have the Brave token engine, which puts the Wandering Griffin Rider, which is a negate. And there's just so many ways to proc Witch's Strike and just instantly win the game. But in this deck, you actually can't play certain cards. Like, you can't run Torrential because your deck is a very field presence heavy deck. Like, Torrential actually hurts you very badly, so we can't run Torrential in our deck, unfortunately. So we need other blowout trap cards that can really just hinder our opponent's field, and Witch's Strike is one of the best in the game. I mean, like, if you're playing against Sword Soul and you activate like a really good trap card like Vadis, and they negate it with Baron, and you Witch's Strike them, that's probably just game. Like, that's how powerful Witch's Strike is, because it destroys all cards your opponent controls and in their hand, which is absurd, and that is why we are playing 2 Witch's Strike. Next up, we are on 2 Ice Dragon's Prison. So this card is, you know, obviously just a very good trap card. This is what I was talking about with high impact stuff when I was talking about Ash. Ice Dragon's Prison is essentially a card that gets you 2 resources for 1 because it steals a monster out of your opponent's graveyard and banishes that and 1 on field, which is very, very good. And it's just an amazing trap in general. And we do just want to be playing really good trap interrupts to go with our Exosister engine. Alright, next up is quite the interesting card, and it's one you're going to have to stick around for my reasoning. I know there's going to be people that are just skipping around in the deck profile, and they're going to miss why I'm running this, because this card is generically not very good, but there is reasoning for it in this deck, so you're just going to have to stick with me and why I'm running it. We are on 3 regular Mirror Force. Now this card, you know, I look like I'm at table 500 right now, right? Because Mirror Force hasn't seen competitive meta play since maybe, you know, 2012. It just hasn't been a good card for a very long time. And I mean, it has seen play in like 2014 in the slower formats like Hat format. But it didn't even see much play then. But Mirror Force, it has a reasoning in the deck. And that is, like, you can't play Torrential, first of all. So you do need a blowout just for your opponent's card, in which Mirror Force is that blowout. You're sort of mitigating the main weakness of Mirror Force in the fact that it can be popped by card effects with your Lord of the Heavenly Prison, which is going to protect your Mirror Force. But not only that, one of the best ways to play around Exosister is to just summon any monster and beat over the Exosisters on field. Like, if you end with just an Ellis, or like an Ellis and a Sophia, and they're not touching their graveyard, they're just really weak monsters on the field. So your opponent can just normal summon something even like a Boots, or not a Boots, Boots is actually too small, but like a Cloak or a Torn Scale, and they can actually run over attack position Exosister monsters. They're so tiny. Your opponent could summon Vorse Raider and beat your whole field essentially. So Mirror Force sort of mitigates this by helping protect your Exosister monsters on field, but it also puts their monsters in graveyard, monsters your opponent might need or have graveyard effects, and this puts monsters in grave for your opponent to activate or do something with, which will help proc your Exosister monsters. So Mirror Force could actually be like decent in this deck. It's done well in testing. It essentially helped me 2-0 a Sky Striker player this last weekend. It was just very good one game. Because it puts Ray in a very weird position against the Exosister monsters. But yeah, Mirror Force has been testing very nicely, and I know it looks really weird, but I hope my reasoning was enough to convince you that Mirror Force isn't like a terrible card in this deck. And then lastly, we are on to Trap Trick. We are on a lot of normal traps in this deck that are very good, like especially our engine trap Vadis. You can banish a Vadis to set a Vadis, and that's very, very good because that trap is insane. But also with cards like Witch's Strike, it's very funny when you can like activate Vadis, they Baron negate. You can chain Trap Trick to set Witch's Strike, and then on new chain just activate the Witch's Strike, and it's just the most impactful trap in your deck. So Trap Trick plus Witch's Strike is actually very good. But again, we just have a lot of normal traps, and an in-engine one we definitely want to see, so Trap Trick just makes a lot of sense. Alright, on to the extra deck, because that is it for the main deck. We are on 40 cards. And the extra deck is going to have a lot of Xyz monsters for sure, and a lot of Exosister monsters. So starting off, we have the 3 of your main Exosister monster, 3 Michaelis. This card is really good. It also took me a while to realize this, but the extra deck monsters are actually like amped up forms of the main deck monsters. Like, this is actually Ellis, who's just wielding her sword. They all have like a demon slaying weapon that powers them up. Again, I really like the lore behind this deck, and even if that's not true, that's my headcanon right now. But this is actually Ellis, and yeah, she's really good. On the turn she summons, she can quick effect banish one card your opponent controls or in their graveyard. Now, it does target, which is unfortunate, but she is the best interrupt Xyz for the deck. And she probably has the best detach effect too. You can detach a material to add a Exosister spell or trap from your deck to your hand. This can search like the best cards in your deck, like Pax or Vadis, and that is very, very good. So yeah, you can end up getting pretty good searches turn 1, and Michaelis is just your best interrupt and the one you want to run at 3. Next, we are on 2 of each of the other ones. We have 2 Caspatel, which is actually Stella with a giant spear, which is very cool. She is the partner for Michaelis because, again, Stella and Ellis are partners. And you can tell the Exceeds are partners by their first effect, so Michaelis and Caspatel actually cannot be destroyed by battle with a monster special summon from the graveyard, which is, you know, not a great form of protection, but it can be pretty good versus Destroy Phoenix Enforcer sometimes. This one on summon restricts your opponent, I believe, from activating monster effects in the graveyard. Oh no, neither player can special summon monster effects in the graveyard. This one is very similar to a different one, so I get mixed up, but you can detach material from this one to add an Exosister monster from your deck to your hand, so that can be pretty good to search follow-up or find a monster you need. Next we have 2 Gabrine, which is actually Irene. Yeah, this one's pretty good. Her on summon effect is she's actually like an infinite impermanent, which can be really good. Paired with Michaelis, you get an imperm and a quick effect banish for free off of like a Vadis, which is very, very powerful. And she also has a very good effect where you can detach to give all Xyz monsters you control this turn plus 800 attack. This can be very good at OTKing and just putting a lot of damage on the board and helping you get over big monsters. I mean, Michaelis gets to 3300 with this effect, so she's actually quite big. And then last for Exosister monsters, we are on 2 Asophiel, which is actually Sophia. And this one's pretty good. This is the one that when it's summoned, your opponent cannot activate card effects in the graveyard. This can be very good against things like Invocation and Destroy Phoenix Enforcer. Yeah, just very, very powerful. And then her detach effect is she can target one monster your opponent controls and bounce it to the hand, which can help in clearing boards and making sure you can swing in for damage. And yeah, all the Exosister monsters just are like pretty good at hitting the board off of your Exosisters in the main deck and like swarming and giving you a lot of material to do other things with your extra deck. Next up, we have the Gallant Granite because we are on level 4 monsters and we can search Lord of the Heavenly Prison, so this card makes a lot of sense. Then we are on the F-Zero package because we have a lot of non-number rank 4s, so you can very easily go like Michaelis and Caspatel turn 1. Just kind of threw those out there. But yeah, you can go each of these turn 1, get a search for a spell or trap, get a search for a monster, and then go F-Zero into Utopic Draco Future, which is a lot of value. The unfortunate thing is this does open your deck up to Nibiru for like almost no reason, so I often, like especially game 1, don't end up going for like the F-Zero play. Even if I have it, I'll just make a rank 4. But yeah, this package is very, very powerful, so we do want to be running it. Then we are on the Utopia and the Lightning. Originally I was on Utopia double, but I found that card to just be very, very bad, so I took it out. It just never ever came up, and it was just a brick I kept drawing. So we're on Utopia and the Lightning because this can help you out big monsters, but also it is the easiest way to make 4 material Zeus, which is something we definitely want to have in our Xyz deck because Zeus is a powerhouse of a card. Alright, that's going to do it for the Exosister deck profile. Now this deck is new and there's no like best way to play it in my opinion yet. It definitely needs a lot of testing. The deck definitely has some inherent weaknesses that I think need to be addressed, and they are getting a new card in the future that helps, but it's still not great. The deck needs quite a bit of help from Konami to be like really, really good, but it is pretty good now. I'd say it's definitely serviceable. I quite enjoy the deck's like lore and the way it plays. It is quite passive, but it can do some cool stuff that other decks aren't really doing, which I enjoy, and make your opponent play in quite a different way. So yeah, that is it for the Exosister deck profile. If you did enjoy, leave a like, subscribe, leave down below what you're thinking of doing with this deck. This has been Aaron from Top Tier Gaming. Bye YouTube.